So you've probably seen the headlines coming out of China's Xinjiang region. We're talking about mass surveillance, cultural erasure, and the detention of over 1 million Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims. Now, just to put that number in perspective, that is the largest mass internment of an ethnic minority since the Second World War. But the real question, the one we're going to dig into, is why? Why is all of this happening? Beyond those headlines, the answer is this really complex puzzle of security, economics, and national identity. So to start piecing it all together, we need to get a handle on the sheer scale of what's happening on the ground. Okay, first, it starts with a system of technological control that is just unprecedented. I want you to try and imagine this. GPS trackers, mandatory on every car, facial and voice recognition systems everywhere, even algorithms that can flag you as suspicious just for using a bit too much electricity at home. And running right alongside that surveillance is the systematic dismantling of an entire culture. We're seeing documented reports of mosques and cemeteries being destroyed, the Uyghur language being banned in schools, and even entire villages being renamed. Literally wiping cultural memory right off the map. And then, at the very heart of all this, you have the mass internment system. We're talking about over 1 million people who have been arbitrarily detained in camps that the state officially calls vocational training centers. So you have to ask, how does the Chinese state possibly explain all this? Well, the official story, the entire justification, is built around a single narrative: counter-terrorism. Beijing frames its actions as this necessary campaign against what it calls the three evils. Now, by deliberately blurring these three concepts together, the state can justify using these incredibly sweeping anti-terror tools to control what is, for all intents and purposes, everyday cultural and religious life. And if you look over time, there's this really clear shift in the language they use. Before 9/11, the state was mostly worried about separatism. But after 9/11, China strategically latched onto the language of the global war on terror. This gave them a kind of international cover to rebrand Uyghur descent as a jihadist threat, which then paved the way for the massive Strike Hard campaign that kicked off in 2014. And this really exposes the huge gap between the official terminology and the reality that's being reported. What the state calls vocational education and training centers, former detainees describe as simply mass internment camps. What the state calls de-radicalization, they report as a process of forced assimilation, a kind of psychological warfare designed to sever a person's connection to their faith and their culture. So this brings up a really crucial question. If this was just about stopping violent terrorists, why would the policies target such basic everyday parts of life? The evidence really suggests that the campaign's true target is, well, it's much, much broader. Look at this list. The state has effectively criminalized completely normal religious practices. Things that are accepted expressions of Islamic faith all over the world, like growing a beard or fasting for Ramadan, or even just saying the greeting Assalamu alaikum, are now treated as signs of extremism, signs that can get you sent to a detention camp. Basically, religious piety has been reframed as a disease. And this quote, wow, this is from a Communist Party official. And it's just chilling. It completely reveals the logic underneath it all. From the state's point of view, Islam that hasn't been, sinicized, it's not just a belief system. It's seen as an ideological virus, a contagion that has to be cleansed from the population. But wait, there's another layer to this whole thing. Some analyses argue that while the tools might be cultural, the main motivation, it's economic. And we're talking on a massive global scale. It's time to follow the money. Okay. Meet the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. This is China's signature foreign policy project. It's a multi-trillion-dollar global infrastructure plan to build new trade corridors all over the world. And Xinjiang? It isn't just some province on the edge of this plan. No, it is the absolute, indispensable land-based gateway connecting China to Central Asia and all the way to Europe. So, for the Belt and Road Initiative to work, Beijing needs absolute, total, non-negotiable stability in this vital corridor. Any local unrest, any dissent, any expression of a separate identity, it's not just seen as a social problem. It's viewed as an existential threat to China's #1 geopolitical and economic ambition. In that sense, the repression is a calculated investment. And this economic imperative is backed up by a long-term policy of demographic engineering. Just look at this shift. Back in 1953, Uyghurs made up 75% of the population. Fast forward to 2017, after decades of state-sponsored migration, and the Han Chinese population has surged to over 40%. This is a systematic dilution of the indigenous population, and it works to undermine any future claims to autonomy.
But what if? What if the terrorism pretext, the cultural attacks, and the economics, what if they're all just symptoms of an even deeper fear? Some analyses suggest the ultimate threat isn't what Uyghurs do, but simply who they are.
This brings us to a really fascinating concept called competitive indigenousness. The basic idea is that the Uyghurs, as a people with their own distinct, long history in that specific region, they represent a competing story, a competing claim to the land itself, and that directly challenges the state's official Han-centric version of history. This quote from an academic analysis it hits the nail on the head. A bomb is a security problem, sure, but a historical claim? That's an existential one. Because if Uyghurs can make a credible argument that we were here first, it fundamentally questions the legitimacy of the state's very presence there. And when you see it that way, suddenly the state's own internal language makes perfect, chilling sense. This directive, quoted in human rights reports, isn't about security. This is the language of elimination. It's about eliminating a competing identity, a competing history, and a competing claim to the land. So, with all these intersecting policies, what's the end result? While sources suggest it's not stability. Instead, it creates a dangerous, self-perpetuating cycle. It's a classic authoritarian feedback loop. The state's extreme repression creates profound alienation and resentment. That alienation can, in turn, fuel the very dissent and potential radicalization that the state claims it's trying to prevent. And then, the state uses that resistance as proof, as justification for even harsher measures. And the cycle just keeps going.
Which leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. When the price of stability is the complete and total erasure of a people's culture, their history, and their identity, is the true goal really security? Or is it replacement?